That's right back, Charlie. Definitely.
Because you always just that active red line defending. I think it's like.
People deluded, I'm back again.
Come on, Ian, man. Come on. And with an introduction like that, what more can I say? People deluded, I'm back again. This is a special show. This is someone I've wanted to get on my channel for a long time. I'm a big fan of his content. If you're not subscribing and you don't know about the content Harvey does, then get to know. Again, click the description. His link's there. What are you saying, my guy? I hope you're well and safe.
Mate, I'm awesome, thank you. And thank you so much for having me on. It's genuinely an honour. And let's do something special today.
I mean, it's an honor to have you. Like I said, I'm a big fan of your content, your opinions, your tactical analysis and everything. You deserve a lot more subscribers and hopefully you get there. Before we get into it, like because I always like to ask this with content creators, what got you into content and in terms of creating it? What, kind of forced you to make content or take that step and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I would say for me, I was... sort of family relationships, they've always been in the broadcasting and media space. So it was always something that I was not familiar with, but recognized as something that I would like to experience one day and even just try out. And it was really just, something that I told myself I would give a go this summer and really just see how it goes. And thankfully, the main thing is I've really enjoyed doing it. And it's gone down really well from what I think.
Yeah, it has gone down a real a treat, people. I want to ask you another question because I've seen you wear an Arsenal shirt and a Leicester shirt. I assume you're an Arsenal fan. I'm 99% sure you're an Arsenal fan, but what's that about?
Yeah, I am an Arsenal fan, massive Arsenal fan. Been an Arsenal fan my whole life. So there's no deviance in allegiance, that's for sure.
I mean, that's great stuff. I mean, let's get into the thick of this, people. Again, this is my chance to really ask you questions. Before we get into Man City and Lens and all of these things, what have you made of our start to the season? And how would you compare it to last season?
I think it's been very different this start of the season. I mean, I've talked a lot about Arteta trying to make us a more unpredictable and adaptable side, sort of more comfortable in uncomfortable scenarios. And I think, myself included, a lot of us have not really fully understood that in a way. And there's been a lot of tactical tweaks and different systems trying to make us more comfortable, like I said, this season. And it's been something that the players, I think, of course, still a young squad. The average age is still 24, isn't it? That a lot of them have to mature in. And I've talked about the balance between being patient and being ruthless, and I think experience is something that we're still waiting for in this squad, and we can't wait forever, of course, but Arteta tactically has been much more experimental in pre-season. That's continued into the full season, and I think it's something that we just haven't seen coming, and we're going to have to maybe grow into the season as opposed to starting off firing on all cylinders like we did last year.
I think you're bang on the money. You mentioned in terms of being unpredictable and uncomfortable. For someone who doesn't know what you mean, or someone that's never seen Arsenal play, what do you mean? What do you mean specifically by that? And would it be fair to say in that case that there's been some teething issues regarding that?
Absolutely. I think I've described it as two different setups this season. One that I call the big space setup, which I can describe if you want to, and then the sort of slower.
Go ahead, man.
More pondering, methodical approach. And these two quite polar opposite tactical approaches have been implemented by Arteta this season. Basically, what the big space setup, or what I call it, that is, we started with essentially playing two shadow strikers behind the centre forward, as opposed to the Xhaka and Ødegaard relationship last season, where it was Xhaka as that sort of second phase presence in midfield. We're essentially trying to cheat the opposition and to have 2 or 3 centre forwards in and around the box at all times. So we start with two shadow strikers next to the centre forward, whether that be Nketiah or Jesus. And basically, we it's attached to the signing of Raya. We look to play long, much more often, launch balls, certainly from goal kicks, find the target, which is often Kai Havertz, and then play off him. So those two shadow striker roles are super, super important because we need to have sort of the gatherers of the ball to pick up those loose second balls and then play it out to what I have as a wide free man on the left, which in an ideal world would be Martinelli, sort of that explosiveness that he has. And we have a wide free man on the left hand side, and we sort of leave it like that deliberately. And this is a structure that Pep has used often at Man City and now has returned to with the signing of Doku. And it's just being able to have more and different diverse ways of building up the play, because going to Havertz as a long ball is something, irrespective of Havertz and who the long ball target is, something that we've needed under Arteta, because the two main teams that we've struggled against, being Manchester City and Brighton, have both implemented man-man presses. Yeah, again, both implemented man-man presses against us. If we talk about last season, Brighton when we played them at home, and of course that fretful day in April against Manchester City last year. And we've had no get-out ball, essentially. And the return of forwards such as Evan Ferguson, Erling Haaland, Ivan Toney, these sorts of players. And if you look at all the strikers that are sought after, and all the centre forwards that are sought after in the window, even players like Kolo Muani, who's gone to PSG, they're all now a return to the more complete,
more traditional one, yeah.
And it's not Arteta just saying, this is what Havertz is, this is what we're going to get out of him, because we still have centre forwards who are much more mobile and much more fluid in their positioning. But he certainly wants that option. And that's what we have in this big space setup. And that often means bypassing the second phase of play and building up in a more disjointed way. But that is part of the ideas concerning it. And it's something that we've really struggled with sometimes, not having that Xhaka second phase link in between the play. Because, of course, Zinchenko can't always invert and stay inverted in the midfield. Sometimes he has to stay as part of sort of a nominal back four, and he's forced out to stay on the left. So at times, linking the play and combining the thirds are difficult. And that's why I've been a massive proponent on my channel for Ødegaard getting what I call a bigger zone of influence in the Arsenal team, and often being able to drop deeper. And I mean, the Thomas Partey injury is very frustrating for that reason, because I would quite like to see us building up the ball in sort of, if we build up in that 4-2-4 shape with Rice and Partey straight away in that pivot, I think that gives us a lot more central access and a lot more build up through the phases, and maybe allow us to see Rice in that left-hand sided number 8 a bit more, Havertz in the centre forward. And that would be the closest sort of dynamic we would have to a Xhaka Partey relationship. But that's the big space setup, essentially trying to cheat the opposition, bypass the second phase, attack quicker. And then it's been, I think the teething issues that you so rightly pointed out are totally right, because we're playing with this setup, which was especially notable when Partey was inverting from right back into midfield. But we're playing with this setup. And then when we are really on the ball and in settled possession, there's this real emphasis from Arteta to play a much more slow, controlled, ponderous style of football. Almost, death by 1,000 passes.
As he once said, yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of getting used to that. And I think they're so diametrically opposed that the team are in a sort of in a stage of maturity where they're trying to link these two approaches. And I'll go back to it. I think the key thing for Arsenal is the balance between patience and ruthlessness, and making, because I haven't been, I love the quality of the side and I love the ideas, but I really have not been at times impressed by how we've used the ball this season. I mean, watching the Spurs game, I don't know what you thought on it, but I really think that game should have been was fully defined by the first half. Of course, people talk about that Jesus missed chance, and rightly so. But the amount of times we were able to turn the ball over at high up the pitch, or win our sort of transitionary duels with our back three in possession against Spurs on the break, we could never even so reliably sustain pressure. We either gave the ball straight back to Spurs and sort of made it a chaotic sort of turnover after turnover affair, or when we did get our studs on the ball and tried to focus on retaining possession, which we should have done, we didn't make it count. So there certainly is teething issues, and deciding how we use the ball, whether we attack in this more chaotic, sort of embracing chaos way, or become more patient. And I think sometimes it's recognizing game states and what's required at certain times, and that's certainly an area that the team are yet to fully cohere in. And I think once those sort of relationships and understandings really start to bed in, then we can start to look at more wholesale changes, and maybe starting to change roles and bits and bobs after that. But we really need to focus on, I think, still getting the players up to speed. Hopefully we grow into the season.
I think like last season, you could kind of predict our starting 11 and who was going to play in roles. And naturally, you know, Arsenal was a breath of fresh air to the league. People for a long part of last season didn't really know how to cope. Now, obviously, there's no secrets in football. Naturally, people are going to try and read Arsenal. You know, if you double up, even triple up against Bukayo Saka, if you find a way to mitigate against Zinchenko, either targeting balls over his head or stopping him from inverting last season, you kind of stopped how Arsenal would play. So naturally, Arteta's job is to find more layers, keep what we did last season and bring more gears into the game, and naturally just make us more unpredictable, as you said. And I think we are doing that. I think the fact of, I know we lost to Lens, but I wouldn't say we've been perfect, but it's definitely been all right. We've got one defeat. We've taken points in the Premier League, you know, with the exception of dropping points from winning positions against Fulham and Spurs. So we're moving all right. And I think that's testament to the standards we're now setting, in that we're not necessarily fully happy, really and truly. So I think you're right. And naturally, in anything in life, if you try and adapt or you try and do new things, you're going to have teething issues. And like you rightly pointed out, it is a young squad. They're all trying to kind of learn their own definitive roles, as well as obviously the added gears that Mikel Arteta is trying to insert. So I think you're bang on the money. On the topic of us being patient and being ruthless, what do you feel about our play in the final third? Because for me personally, bro, I do like it. I do feel it's in a harsh way to Mikel Arteta. I do like that it's almost a repetition of what we're doing on training, but I don't think it has that healthiness of randomness. It's quite scripted. It's left, right, backwards, forward. And I like the patientness. I don't want us to be gun-ho, but I just think it can be a bit predictable. Definitely when you look at times where we've even won games, you know, if you get 10 players behind the ball, 11 men in your own half, kind of be rigid defensively, you kind of have done half the job. I don't feel we have enough final third runners. I don't think we go enough direct at those sort of stages. So I think that's an issue. And I don't think we're ruthless enough. So what do you think about us in the final third? Because I feel I'm being a bit harsh. We have scored a lot of goals, but I do think chance creation and chance conversion ultimately shouldn't be an issue of Arsenal, because we've got a bunch of players. We'll be here all day talking about Trossard, Martinelli, Saka, Jesus, and Nketiah, etc., etc. So what do you make of us in the final third? And actually, to go back to your point, I've always said, I think in the middle third, like in the midfield for Arsenal, I think we can match any team. I just think, you know, in the defensive third, we've still got those mistakes and we're not ruthless enough. And I think when you look at Jorginho's mistake, when you look at Jesus failing to convert his chances, and Eddie and Nketiah as well, of course, it's a team game and you can't just blame them, but it's those pivotal moments that I think sum up the collective, as well as us probably being a bit too susceptible on the transition. So what do you make of our chance creation and chance conversion in the final third?
I think it's something that I still believe will click, and will click eventually. But a lot of what I've said is, last season we had a real balance on our left-hand side and our right-hand side. And I think there's this season actually a real dichotomy between the two, because if we look at sort of our normal starting 11 this season, let's take Martinelli before he got injured on the left wing, Havertz as sort of the left shadow striker, left interior, and Nketiah, who's been the main centre forward. Now, Nketiah on his own has sort of a more right-hand-sided bias to his play, not like Jesus.
Naturally, yeah.
Side. And of course, as we've been saying, Zinchenko can't always stay inverted. So on that left-hand side, you actually lack at times a real pass magnet and a ball magnet. And there's a lot of movement, a lot of running, and not really actually sometimes the right player to mix that sort of incisiveness with the retention. And that's why at times the left-hand sides look dysfunctional. And if you look that over to the right-hand side, it's quite complicated really, because we try and overload the left-hand side at times, but without those players who are able to ping balls around in triangles.
Kind of stifled, yeah.
But we look to overload the left-hand side so that Saka on the right-hand side has more space to enter and more space to run in. In the North London derby, that was exactly what we did, and tried to isolate Saka against Ndogi. And the problem is there that the right-hand side, Ødegaard doesn't always have the right sort of body angles, always conducive to always combining with Saka. I see that right-hand side for Arsenal as absolutely perfect when Ødegaard's in that right-hand sided half space. Saka has the option to go in behind or to drift inside, and he has the overlap of White on the right-hand side. And in that shape, we're sort of a 2-2-6, right, with White as that wide and high right man. But of course, the conditions have to be absolutely optimal for White to reliably be able to overlap, because obviously it goes without saying it leaves you more exposed at the back.
Just got to be street smart with it. You're right.
Yeah, and I've been talking about. You've been saying how it looks quite one-dimensional, one way in terms of thought process at times. And I think that's at times absolutely right, because when we are our attack at times looking to overload this left-hand side and try and almost funnel the ball out to the right-hand side, we can look a little bit one-dimensional. And I would say, again, it's a big part of it, and a big part of it at Lens was how a side and how Arsenal as a team can attack sort of the same spaces when we're against a side with a low block, but look to break them down in different ways, because we absolutely have that within us. We have that, like I said, unpredictability within us, whether it's when we have a full squad available, whether it's which fullback inverts from which side, which interior drops deeper, how our left wing rotates sometimes into the pivot to give Havertz space in behind, etc. There's so much unpredictability, and I think it'd be a real shame not to tap into that, because I think at Lens, like you said, there's a lot of into-out ball retention, slow, ponderous play, trying to wait for that opening. But there was no divergence in attack. And suddenly, when we went long in the final 5 minutes, Nketiah as an outlet, I really, really like him, even though he's not, breaching 6 foot or anything. He didn't necessarily win any headers, but suddenly we were winning second balls, playing with the two shadow strikers.
He's an avenue to build on, really.
And it was, from my point of view, I think Danso had a good game for Lens, but if we had mixed in going a bit more direct and mixing in a type of attack, recognizing the game states, and again, that's where we have to be a bit more mature. That's where we can develop. I would have loved to seen us against Lens play even from open play where we had settled possession. We're moving it around their sort of 4-5-1 block. Would love us to just see it put the ball into the box a little bit more. Ødegaard, in a way, sort of maybe dropping outside their block and playing those half space crosses in behind. I would love to see us attack different ways, because Lens are very athletic. They were very compact.
Very physical as well.
Yeah. As soon as we went into those pockets, they collapsed on us. And so we needed to be much more diverse. And to say that we weren't unpredictable enough is maybe a little defeat for me, because I still think we have it within us, and deep down we are the most unpredictable side around, but we haven't got that relationship and balance correct yet, I don't think.
I mean, I think to touch on the Lons game, I think it was kind of, you know, the good, bad, and somewhat the ugly in that, as we spoke about how teams set up against us, I think just individually, I would probably say Saka when he was on the pitch, Jesus, and probably Rice. They're the only ones that I wouldn't say I'm happy with, because it doesn't matter if 3 players were good. We're an 11-man team and whatnot. But I think it showed us in terms of our unpredictability, in terms of our naivety defensively. And I think you mentioned it, and I kind of spoke on it in a previous video. You know, from the first minute you saw Raya try and hit Havertz. I think a byproduct of that was there was a lot of gaps, because I did think Odegaard, as you said, his body positioning, he couldn't really do what he typically does. Havertz is leaving a lot of gaps, and Rice is somewhat deserted, and Rice is stuck between does he stick or twist. And I think he, as we were chasing the game, I think he had a good game in the sense that he was really driving the ball forward. Like I do think dribbling and carrying the ball are two different things, but I did like that from Declan Rice, that he's driving it forward. And I think you made a great point in that for the last couple of years, we've been good on the right-hand side. I just feel, you know, with Tomiyasu, he's more of a conservative defender. I feel his natural progression in this Mikel Arteta side is probably to be a centre-half or to be somewhat of a game closer from a fullback position. Saka isn't going to really get them overlaps as much as he would with Benjamin White when he came off and we went with Fabio Vieira. I think in theory it made sense because we're playing a low block. In theory, Fabio Vieira can kind of pick up pockets, but I think we kind of played into Lens's game in that we're quite narrow and predictable. I think he should have probably went with Nelson. And obviously on the left-hand side, you know, we've had a bit of teething issues. You know, Zinchenko's had to come back from injury. Kai Havertz is having some teething issues, settling into that void that Xhaka's left. And, you know, Martinelli's injured. So we've lost a great player on the transition, a tenacious player. Trossard's just coming back from injury, and Trossard, he just didn't have a good game. So I think we need to sort out that left-hand side. Kind of continuing the theme with midfield. What have you made of Kai Havertz in an Arsenal shirt? Are you convinced? And do we kind of miss Granit Xhaka? And I'd also say, how do you just generally feel about our midfield? Because I do like, you know, Mikel Arteta, what he does with the Rice, the Havertz and Odegaard, if that's what he wants to do. Me personally, at this moment in time, if Partey is fit against City, it has to be Partey, Rice and Odegaard. So generally, how do you feel about Kai Havertz and his role? Like, what do you think of him? And what do you think of our midfield options, or our midfield trio options, better yet?
Well, first of all, I think when Havertz first signed, I did a lot of content on where he would fit in for Arsenal. And I see him having two roles going forward in this Arsenal side in the long term. I saw him as a centre forward, or as we've seen, as it was kind of effective against Nottingham Forest and in pre-season, as that sort of Rom Deuter type role, when we are able to sort of overload that last line, go almost the 3-1-6 shape, and he's able to space invade, move into space that others have created, and have a bigger license to roam and pick up spot pockets, and have his role much more simplified, as in much more defined about output. And I think that's where we'll see the best in Kai Havertz. So those are the two roles that I've always aired that I think in the long term he will play at. You can see why the shadow striker on the left hand side would be appealing for Arteta, making those late runs off the shoulder of the defenders. But I just think it's being slightly wasted in terms of you don't spend 65 million. I think defensively, I would just say defensively in terms of his metrics and numbers, he's actually been quite impressive.
That's one thing he's done well, yeah.
I've been looking at the numbers, and I was very surprised how, in terms of defensive actions and in tackles in particular, he's up on 1.5 more tackles per game than Granit Xhaka. Of course, he's very good in the press as well, whether we go sort of the 4-1-4-1 and he's in that midfield four with Ødegaard behind Nketiah in the one, or we go with a 4-4-2 and he's pressing as part of the front two. I think his angles are very clever. But of course, you don't spend 65 million on an upgrade to Xhaka defensively. And I think we just need to have him in the box more to give him the confidence to sort of dominate those in-box actions. So I still don't see him as lining up as sort of a left interior in the long term. And I hope that isn't the case. In terms of the midfield, I think the best setup for Arsenal is, certainly in Thomas Partey's absence, is when Ødegaard's allowed to drift deeper, like we've seen against Bournemouth, we've seen against PSV, allowed to drift into that pivot with Rice or into a 3 with Zinchenko and Rice, and then allow Havertz to have a set point of high in between the lines and be that out ball at times. That's where you're going to see that's where you're going to see the best of Kai Havertz. But still, I've been talking about increasing Ødegaard's zone of influence. I still think it's much more cleaner, our build-up, if he is going to drop deeper, to maybe even play on the left-hand side. Because one thing I love about Ødegaard is playing as a second phase player. His temperament on the ball is superb. I can't actually remember ever a time that he was dispossessed with his back to goal. He has the right balance between progression and retention, and it would really actually allow him to, his goal scoring that a lot of people have talked about. I think I've seen quite a lot of saying he shouldn't drop deeper because that would be a part of his game that falls off. I think it would actually be the only part of his output that doesn't significantly tail at all, because if we look at how he scores his goals, it's often those late runs into the box
on the edge of the area,
finding those pockets of space, right? And being that second phase player, that means you drop deeper if in the build-up is required, and then you roam into the higher areas where you can be much more dangerous. That's
unmarked,
That's what İlkay Gündoğan did for years for Manchester City. So I still think that's a role for Kai Havertz. And I think if he was on the left, because like I said, I've never actually seen him lose the ball. Martin Ødegaard, I've never seen him lose the ball in those deeper areas. But I think at times with him being left-footed on the right-hand side, it doesn't lend itself to sort of the speedness of circulation. I think at times it can look quite awkward if he's playing a first-time pass out towards the right-hand side in that channel. But that's sort of nitpicking. And I think the City blueprint, going back to the larger midfield, I think the City blueprint, bearing in mind Partey is still at the club and we didn't sign another Xhaka replacement out and out, if you will. I think the City blueprint for Arteta was Partey in the 6 and Rice as a left 8 with Havertz in the centre forward. I think that is the City blueprint. And we saw elements of that in the Community Shield. We couldn't fully create the settle environment because Timber, obviously starting at left back, wasn't fully comfortable with inverting into midfield. So he normally just stayed as a nominal left back. And that meant at times Rice and Timber had to rotate in positions. Rice couldn't play as high as he wanted. But I think that is the City blueprint on a large scale. And I think I can kind of see why Havertz, the appeal of, like I said, playing him in a left interior. I think as well, maybe I'm clutching at straws, but maybe it's Arteta trying to get him used to operating at every single angle, because at Chelsea he's always pulled away to the right. And I think he's much more impactful when he's able to play, if he is in midfield, sort of a tip of a diamond or closer to that right-hand side, almost where Ødegaard plays for us now. I think we're trying to get him comfortable at playing all angles, but I think it's come at the expense of Havertz's confidence. So yeah, I'm a person, and a fan that really thinks Havertz can succeed. I think we just need to be patient with him, and as is the case with all sort of natural Ramdeuters, the Thomas Mullers, the Dele Allis, the Gini Wijnaldums, they're never sort of the most eye-catching aesthetic players, but you judge them on output. So I think hopefully once Havertz can get his confidence back and be in his own settled environment at Arsenal, we can just judge him on output alone. But he's certainly suffering big time from confidence at the moment, and you don't spend 65 million on a defensive upgrade.
I think you're bang on the money. I think with Kai Havertz, I'm yet to be fully convinced. I think there's been some good moments. I think there's been some underwhelming moments. I think Lens was disappointing. I would say with Kai Havertz, to not criticize him, but criticize him, it's like you never really see him in the game. I'm a big fan of his defensive metrics and all those other elements, but I don't want to have to keep watching games again to speak about that. In relation to his confidence, I think his players, his teammates will have an appreciation of what he does, and it's kind of reflected with the penalty. Arteta's obviously signed him, so naturally he's he's going to give him confidence. But I think Havertz has to find that on his own. You know, there's going to be some Arsenal fans you're never going to convince because you've never been their cup of tea. They didn't necessarily want you, and obviously your ex-Chelsea ties. And as much as I want to give you kind of time, whether I think you're going to do it or not, you know, obviously we're trying to go for league titles and challenge for things. So we can't really put Kai Havertz above the collective. So it's a bit of an interesting one, really and truly. And Arteta, that's what the signing of the summer Arteta is going to have to live or die by, because you can see how Timber makes us stronger. You can see how Raya in his own way makes us stronger. And evidently with Declan Rice, Kai Havertz is the one you're kind of looking at and what will define it. I think you're bang on the money with Odegaard, and I think kind of what we were speaking about earlier in that I think we've improved off the ball, but that might have come at a detriment slightly to how we kind of score goals. I think Odegaard with his goals, I think that's kind of robbed him creativity wise. And I share your opinion. I wouldn't say like for like with Santi Cazorla, but I think Odegaard could kind of do that and dictate the tempo of us. Naturally, that might mean you get less goals or assists, but I think it boosts our creativity. He's far too much of an intelligent player. Like even with Havertz, I know Havertz is more physical than Odegaard, but I don't see any reason why Odegaard can't kind of play in that kind of interior role and be an 8.5. What would be the byproduct of that? I'm not too sure. I think Rice and Odegaard would kind of thrive with that kind of change. So I think you're bang on the money in that regards, if I'm honest. Would you say we miss Granit Xhaka then?
I always loved Granit. And I was always a big fan of him. And I think it's certainly something that, of course, we do miss him. But I think in the longer term thinking of Arteta, the fact that we never signed a proper second phase midfielder, for me, it was always pretty simple in saying that if everyone was fit and we were really in those uber technical or uber physical games where we needed that support in the build-up, it would always be a Rice and Partey midfield. Of course, we haven't really had a chance to see that yet, and only time will tell. And of course, it looks like now that we are missing Xhaka when we have injuries. Xhaka's availability was always flawless, and that's something that obviously hasn't been taken into account by Arteta, by myself. And I also think there maybe is a path being laid for Charlie Patino in the left central midfield role. But a lot of that is how he continues to develop, of course, and how his own relationship with Arteta is in the long term. Just going back, though, on what you, again, talking about Ødegaard, I don't want to sort of draw it out, but part of it is, from what I think, Ødegaard, tremendous footballer, and he should definitely, I think he should remain in the team, of course. Tremendous footballer, but I think his zone of influence and what I was talking about, increasing that, at the moment, if you look at it this season, it's been decreased so much in comparison to last year. He's playing in a very specific pocket of the pitch. And from that very small area of the pitch, he's having sort of the most touches of our whole attacking setup.
So imagine what he'd give us with more sort of responsibility in the middle of the park. That's where you're bang on the money, and I wholeheartedly agree with you, man.
Yeah, because it hampers the team when the heartbeat of the attack, which is for us really Rice in that 6 and Ødegaard and Saka. If the heartbeat, let's just take Ødegaard in particular, if the heartbeat of our attack is playing in a very specialised sort of right 10, right shadow striker pocket, then the burden on that zone of operation completely overweighs the other spaces of the pitch where we could be progressive, where we could box crash, where we could break the opposition down. And I think I said the word funneling at the start of sort of the show, and how at times it looks like we're funneling into the right hand side. It's kind of occurring to me now. Of course, if Ødegaard if he's the heartbeat, the tempo of attack, and rightly so, he's earned that on merit. But in now a smaller zone, of course, it's going to look a bit forced and a bit tiresome at points. And I think for me, what I mean by zone of influence is not necessarily always having a literal bigger zone of grass to cover, if you will, but being really comfortable with attacking at different angles and playing different types of passes, maybe dominating just completely one channel of a pitch, like a Trent Alexander-Arnold or a Kevin De Bruyne, but very comfortable at breaking down sides from a wide range of angles and at sort of different distances, and then having your Declan Rices who have the license to literally cover more ground. So I think that zone of influence can be increased in multiple ways, not just in how much space you're afforded and given the license, but what you're able to do within that pocket. And I think that Ødegaard's pocket of space that he operates in is so small, and his body angles are such a way that it's quite a toilsome, tiresome nature at times, breaking sides down when they are in a very low block and we're not clicking in the final third, in the sense that we might not have the perfect profiles on the pitch. Like if we play with Martinelli on the left wing, we have Nketiah in the centre forward, two very sort of space invading type players. We don't have the balance of movement into off the ball space and also ball retention. So I think there's a lot of times that it can become, like you said, quite one-dimensional when it really shouldn't be, because we're such a multi-purposed attack. We have so many different avenues. And I think at times it comes down to Arteta. I just want to touch on a little bit on the Lons and how we
go ahead, man.
We played against them, because at halftime I was quite adamant that we should have changed things quicker, because if you look at one point, correct me if I'm wrong, but of course Vieira came on for Saka on the right wing. We had Ødegaard in his normal position. We had Jesus in that centre forward, Havertz, and then Trossard. Looking at then, we had no proper ball magnets. We had a lot of ball magnets. We had Vieira.
We had no width.
Ødegaard, ball to feet. Jesus, loads of movement, but it's always ball to feet. It's always how he uses the ball, how he interchanges with others to help us on the ball. There was no real punctuation in behind of Lons. Trossard, again, he's not that type of player. And
we couldn't really go direct. When I say direct, many people think it's just hoofed balls over the top, but we never really had those players that are tenacious in attacking the space and really good on the transition. And
if Havertz isn't in the centre forward reliably, then we can't use him as that centrepiece to play around. So I think it was a roles issue against Lons. I don't think it was anything sort of more underlying or underscoring. I think it was actually, in that case, Arteta having too many similar types of players on the pitch.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think realistically, how we played against Lons before we started to change things the last 5 or 10 minutes is how I really expected the game to go once Lay equalised pretty quickly after our first goal.
I think you're bang on the money there. I think with Ødegaard, one thing I like about Ødegaard, you could probably say Zinchenko to this, but I describe Ødegaard as our most intelligent player in terms of football IQ. You can always see him governing people where to be and things like that. And I think he's very intelligent in reading situations quickly, attacking space, drawing other players away so other players can attack space, as shown by the bulk of his goals. I know he scored a couple of penalties and close range finishes, but the bulk of them are him ghosting into the box on the edge of the area, like shown against Chelsea and Spurs last season. And I think Ødegaard's got more to give in that. And I think Ødegaard, you kind of could rob him of individually what he could do, but it give greater impetus to other players thriving. So I believe that with Ødegaard. I think in comparison to Havertz, I'd say the biggest issue with Havertz, away from confidence and the obvious, is he can kind of play everywhere, but you're not really a master. Like, you can play false nine. We have an appreciation of what you do, but you're not necessarily clinical. You're not necessarily a false nine. You can play in midfield, but you don't necessarily do all of that. As much as I miss Granit Xhaka, as much as I miss Granit Xhaka, and I'm not trying to criticize him, I think a lot of it is overstated by everybody, including myself, because of what we're facing with Havertz or not bringing in people. Like, with the greatest of respect to him, it's not like it's Patrick Vieira. So it's testament to Xhaka, and it's probably damning on our recruitment and things like that. So I think you're bang on the money with that. Where are you at with David Raya against Ramsdale? Because I do feel sorry for Ramsdale, but I care about Arsenal Football Club. If this is what Mikel Arteta wants to do, whether that's to really have two goalies or Raya's the first choice, or it's to like kick Ramsdale up the bum to want to improve, I'm all for that. I would say with David Raya, though, I think he's been good. I don't think he was terrible against Lens. Obviously, when you play out from the back, there are going to be those mistakes. We've seen it with Havertz, we've seen it with Saka, we saw it with Raya. There'll be mistakes on the transition again and again. again, that is football. I do feel with David Raya, however, in like away from home first Champions League game, the Spurs game, where I think the first goal everybody could have done better. Kind of games where he's kind of required to do stuff. It's not that he's played poor, but you're left wanting more. So where are you at with the Ramsdale versus Raya debate? And who do you ultimately see winning it? Do you see Ramsdale regaining his shirt, or do you think Raya is the number one? Or do you kind of believe what Arteta says in that, you know, I really do want two goalies and things like that?
Well, I think Raya certainly is the one at the moment. But I think the difference that I have between Ramsdale and Raya is never quality. It's not in terms of quality. I think it's quite literally in terms of confidence. I mean, the way I see it with Raya, he's been much more, of course, he's been much more composed, and he's been transmitting to the back four that calmness that Ramsdale has in his first 2 years at Arsenal. And that for whatever reason, maybe there's been off-pitch influences, has sort of left Ramsdale for the moment. So I think the big thing is confidence, not a quality difference. Because Raya, in terms of his launched passes and his long ball completion percentage, has been much more. Has been a big decrease in his a small span of games, but in comparison to Brentford last year, of course, he's not always aiming at Ivan Toney, and he's not aiming at Ivan Toney, and he's not always aiming at Kai Havertz for Arsenal. But he hasn't actually had the transformative effect yet going along then maybe it's been made out to be. I think it's at the moment it's just a difference in confidence, and I think Raya is much more comfortable in taking more touches on the ball than Ramsdale, luring an opposition press before sort of I mean, we see, I think a lot have been I'll just make a tangent for now if you don't mind, because
do your thing, man.
Vicario and Onana, when they've both played at the Emirates, of course, have been really composed against awesome Arsenal press. And although both sides struggled to leave the first phase of play, that wasn't down to the goalkeeper's fault, right? They often lured Nketiah in, who was like shadow man marking the player behind them, waited until the final moment to play it into their six or centre back, and then find the free man that Nketiah left. And that sort of confident play is what Raya has over Ramsdale at the moment. And Ramsdale has that within him. I think it really just is a drop-off in confidence. But he has the character, certainly, to relish a sort of battle for the number one jersey. He really does. So right. It's not a done deal. But at the moment, although Raya hasn't had that transformative effect on our on-ball play, he's going to enable us to, I think, more than Ramsdale, mix approaches much more. And I mean, we've at times seen him play that sort of situational left centre back or right centre back that has been sort of the new tactical implementation in the Premier League. And we've seen him play that sort of situational place for Arsenal, where Ramsdale was, and very surprisingly so, less confident, because he's been in his first 2 years, he has been really composed on the ball.
He was a transformable figure for Arsenal, a larger than life personality. It's really difficult for me to see Ramsdale like this. Obviously, as I just said, I care more about the collective. But one thing I like about Ramsdale, he holds his hands up. He's almost like, it's like a mate of yours, really. If you weren't a footballer, you could see yourself being friends with Ramsdale. I think you made a great point about Raya. I'd say for me, with Raya, I think his focus is a bit better. I think he's more confident collecting from crosses. I think he tries to play those difficult passes a lot more. And as you said, I think similar to when Zinchenko came into the team, and how over the years Gabriel's kind of become half a left back, half a centre back when we're in possession. Raya's almost a centre back, and it gives us an added layer. I don't know if Arteta believes Ramsdale can do that, or like you said, if Ramsdale's necessarily confident to do that. So I agree with you about it not being a done deal, and I'm of the belief, let the best man win, in it. You know, I feel a bit harsh for Ramsdale because you've played every game. You're the new captain. You signed a new deal. You're one of the captains. But this is where we want to go. We might be in a reality where Odegaard and Saka might be out of the team and things. Naturally, that's the progressive route. You know, had Timber have been fit for the majority of the season, I know that it's different positions, but kind of the rhetoric around Ramsdale and obviously David Raya, we might be saying that about Zinchenko on the left-hand side, or if Zinchenko has to play in Arteta's mind, we might be saying that about Benjamin White. Ultimately, we need more competition and making it more difficult. So I think you're bang on the money for that. Kind of filtering into that, do you believe Mikel Arteta needs to rotate more?
I've done a bit of a video on this already.
Make sure you're checking it out, folks.
And I've got a one coming out in a couple of days, or maybe after the Man City game. It's just whenever I have time, really. And it's one of the very few, I guess, critiques you could have of Arteta is not really making Arsenal's depth count, because we do have enough depth in the squad. That's something I really want to hone in on. We certainly do, but it's, I think, at times not being relaxed enough and flexible enough to try players in different positions. Why is it always that Vieira has to become that situational right winger when we have one of the best multifaceted forwards, maybe even on the planet, in Jesus, in someone who can play across the whole front three? And we've only really started seeing him play on the wings in very recent times.
Last couple of games,
when Martinelli's injured, because of course Nketiah can do that outlet role on the left-hand side, as he has done in an Arsenal shirt, but then we're sort of getting more to Aubameyang dynamics, and sort of what else do you lose if you stick him out there? So Jesus has become sort of that our only explosive weapon, even if he isn't as pacey as Martinelli. So he's kind of been forced to play out there, but we haven't seen him play on the wings enough. I don't think we'll see Ødegaard make a switch or even an experiment on the left-hand side of midfield, because we just haven't seen it. We certainly won't see it this season, because in pre-season there was so much experimentation and that wasn't one of them. So I think we have the depth to rotate and breeze past sides with a second-string team, but the flexibility within our on-pitch roles are really hampering us. And I think if Arteta has to change that, if our depth is actually to be made useful, because if you look at our defensive cover, even when we have everyone fit, we have someone in Jurriën Timber who can obviously play either fullback and invert from either side, can also play that conservative outside centre-back role.
Yeah, him and Tommy actually can cover all of the back four, really, and you could throw Kyriel into that as well to a slight degree. Yeah,
we have essentially 4 or 5 centre-backs across the squad, or 6 sort of pseudo centre-backs who, as in, players can play everywhere. But we've been loose and limber with that defensive axis, but it hasn't been followed up, I don't think, in the final third yet, for whatever reason. Maybe it's a case of Arteta working from the back to front, from defence to attack, and sort of building from the ground up. But we haven't seen that yet. No, we've seen Vieira, when he has started, playing that sort of gatherer, second striker role, but not really on the right hand side, which is the angles that he played so well at Porto. And maybe a lot of these are questions that, when we do get an answer, are sort of futile and we didn't even need to ask them. But I think we need to be much more conscious in, whilst the squad is young and still able to develop, in trying a few
and
more
impressionable,
yeah. So look, maybe that's a criticism. It's really hard to talk about depth and really hard to talk about substitutions, on-pitch decisions, rotations, because as fans, we never have the full sort of information available. We don't know who's carrying niggles, sort of what's happening off pitch, etc. But I think, as a generalization, that is something Arteta can improve on. I mean, I'd even take Smith Rowe. Arteta has said that Smith Rowe now he doesn't see him as a winger. He sees him as, I think he said, a pocket player. But I'd love to see him now, even if we're rotating in a cup side, in the right-hand side of half space, where he can sort of overlap Saka and allow Saka to come inside more.
Because he's one of the best at that within our squad. Exactly. You're back on the money.
And give us sort of that athletic breaching of low blocks in behind, not playing in front of them the whole time, something different, and it's just about trying it. So maybe that is something that, in terms of rotation, Arteta has to improve on. But of course, the guy's he's still very young. He's still learning on the job, and a lot of people have put Postecoglou up next to him. But Postecoglou is a decade of management as well. Arteta's still in his what, fourth year?
He's still learning on the job, much like our players. Saka hasn't been a professional footballer in terms of this realm as a household name in the Premier League that long. And I think you're bang on the money with that. I do think rotation can be overrated, but it can't be overstated. I think fans want a twofold. You know, you look at the performance against Lens. Again, it didn't go our way, but you could argue everyone apart from Tomiyasu, who, depending on what Arteta wants to implement on Sunday, everyone bar him could probably start against City. You look at that performance, and had we have rotated the team, because we're not quite at City's level where they can make wholesale changes and there's a certain base level, what kind of performance would we have put in? I would say for Mikel Arteta, I just want him to trust his team a bit more. And as I said, it can be overrated, but it can't be overstated. I think there's been times where games have been done and dusted where maybe Saka could have got 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour off. And before you know it, you've saved his legs for an hour. Considering we're playing 3 times a week and we'll bar the FA Cup, which comes into play the turn of New Year, we have to be a bit cute and clever. And it does feel like on the pitch, I feel personally we take more risks in the defensive third than in the attacking third. And I think that's kind of reflected in the changes. Not that Arteta has made wholesale changes defensively, but it seems like there's more fluidity in what he'll do defensively than in the attacking sense. And then for me, it's a bit of a weird one because I do think we're strong defensively without the injuries, but it feels like surely in the attacking third of a pitch is where you could be a bit more risky. Where it's the middle third and the defensive third, you kind of want more solidity because, as they say, defense wins trophies and things like that. So I think you're bang on the money with that, man. I got 2 last questions for you. Again, we have to talk about Arsenal City, man. Let me have it. What's all your thoughts going into that game, man? It almost feels like Judgment Day. It's the last game before the international break. God forbid, but if you lose 2 games in a week before the international break, it is a bit dark, isn't it? Really and truly.
Yeah, I'm sort of in the middle of...
Scary.
I'm sort of in the middle of getting my teeth into the sort of pre-match stuff for that. And obviously I'll be like, I will definitely be releasing sort of a post-match analysis, but I'm kind of in the middle of getting my teeth stuck into the pre-match stuff. And it's kind of been thrown out the water a little bit with maybe not the injury crisis, because I don't know who's going to be available and who isn't for Arsenal at the weekend. But it's very difficult to see whether we will be able to go with that City blueprint that I was talking about, have that help as a secondary controller from that Rice and Partey dynamic in the midfield, and then also be able to go long over City's man-man press to Havertz maybe in the centre forward, have Saka and have Ødegaard gobbling up those second balls and trying to release Martinelli as that wide free man on the left-hand side. So maybe we have that, or maybe it's a totally different complexion in terms of how the team is designed. It will suit us in a way, as in it won't be so we won't be so forced to build the ball up and to be the
it's a chess match.
And be the sort of side with the dominant field tilt across the whole game. Ooh. And then as for City, there's a lot to be answered for them as well. Do they go with the double pivot of Kovacic and Núñez, and sort of the two of them who have really struggled so far when they've played together in having both of them having enough staying power between them? Or do they go with Phillips as sort of the lone six, who of course can give them decent control on the ball? Maybe
he's not Rodri, yeah.
Exactly, maybe not as penetrative as Rodri, but also not have that ascendancy in the duels. You know, of course, you don't say Rodri's a complete athlete, but he's so reliable in his actions, in how he covers space and distance.
Such an intelligent midfielder.
And Phillips hasn't seen that yet. And I mean, he definitely still isn't fit enough to play a full 90 minutes for Manchester City. So there's questions for Pep as well. Going based off the lineup last night, it looks like Doku will play, and that might influence whether Arteta goes for White or Tomiyasu. I think White as a 1v1 defender is a very good 1v1 defender. I just think at times, and something that playing as that outside centre-back has helped him with, at times he's a bit too tentative to get close to his man or go in, and that's something that has improved as he's moved wider from the centre. That's something that still can be improved more though. So maybe he goes with Tomiyasu to go right up against the backside of Doku and not allow him to turn and get running at the Arsenal defence. I think personally I probably would opt for Tomiyasu actually at the weekend, but I wouldn't have any major reservations if it was something different. White has played a lot of minutes for Arsenal, so I think the match will be incredible to watch from an analytical point of view, certainly. And there's a
Not
lot
from a fan point of view, though. I'm gonna be nervous as hell, my guy.
It would be
Oh my god.
But there's still, it's hard to analyze it when there's still so many things up in the air about it. Both sides are not real settled environment. There's still a lot of moving parts. I don't know what you think.
I mean, it's a difficult one because the last couple of games against City, you know, they've been close. Naturally, against City, there's going to be times they're going to have your backs against the wall. There's going to be nervy moments. Their players are going to skip past you. They're going to have chances. But I think we've shown, you know, in the middle third, we can go man for man. We can find a way to stifle them. Unfortunately, it's a 90-minute game. And whether we've won or lost games this season, there's been moments, even back to Nottingham Forest, where we dominated the team. There's nothing to write home about. But there was that unneeded goal in the last moments. And I don't want to be a stickler. I don't want to be that guy who's trying to find negatives where they're not. But to beat a Manchester City side for the league, you need to target 90 points. To beat them over a game, you need to be near enough perfect for 90 minutes. You need to chase that illusion of perfection. And that's where it comes down to. And I think it's how we adapt. If we concede first or score first, how do we adapt? I look at the game at the Emirates last season, which was kind of summed up by a Tomiyasu mistake. And actually Pep Guardiola moving Bernardo Silva from left back to right wing. So it's much of a game where Mikel Arteta is almost going to be on the field as much as them. I think Pep Guardiola's a madman in the sense of, you know, having won a treble, they're not going to let these players go and things like that unless they've got something planned. I think City have started the league better than they did last season, but they're still not in full flow. So it'll be an interesting one. And why I like games like this is I want my players, because as much as I think it's a tactical setup, I think it's an emotional game. We have to channel our energy and kind of like, if we lose, it will be unfortunate, but it's happened, you know. I think we ain't beat them in like 15 league games and stuff. So I kind of want us to be fearless. And I like these games for one, because this is where the realm we wanted to be. And you look at when Arteta walked through the door, the mess we was at. This is kind of a luxury to be fighting City with the context of what this 3 points could or couldn't mean. This is the dynamics we want to be. We want to be playing these teams in these competitions. And also, you know, you look at Spurs and United, ultimately we didn't lose, the different results. But certain things you may or may not get away with against them teams, you might not get away with against the best in the league. So I think it's a good test to see collectively and individually where we're at, really. I think you touched on it greatly with Doku against Benjamin White. That's probably going to be the battle. You know, again, Pep Guardiola probably knows Zinchenko more than Arteta knows him. You can bet your bottom dollar they're going to try and exploit that space. I don't really know where I'm at with Tomiyasu and Benjamin White, and it's one I'm happy I'm not Mikel Arteta, because I don't think you can win. If we win the game, great, nobody cares. But if you lose, exactly, why didn't you start Benjamin White? Why didn't you start Tomiyasu? On one hand, I want to go with Tomiyasu because I look at the Liverpool performance last season where he locked down Mohamed Salah. But on the other hand, I do think the best form of defense is attack. We need to respect them, of course, but we need to have belief. And kind of going back to what we spoke about, I think Benjamin White, Saka, and indirectly Odegaard, that's our best kind of mixture sort of thing, if that makes sense. Like Benjamin White on the overlap, sometimes going into midfield and becoming a centre half. Do we kind of go with that from the off, or do we play Tomiyasu and to kind of close out the game, or do we start Tomiyasu and then we kind of make him tire someone else out and then we go for Benjamin White? So it'll be a very interesting game, and it'll be interesting to see what we do with the front three, because I'm sure you know a lot of Arsenal fans, according to who you speak with, some people want to go with Jesus on the flanks or in the middle, some people want to go with Havertz through the middle, and there's several other things. Again, you hope Martinelli's fit. I'm not gonna lie, if Martinelli's fit, I'd probably risk him. You know, Trossard will probably play, rightly so. I don't think we'll see Smith Rowe. So it'll be an interesting one, but I just want us to really give a good account of ourselves. I don't like to lose, and I'm sure you're the same. I don't like to draw. We want to win every game. But if we can turn around and say we did everything we did and they showed why they're City and the treble winners and stuff, what can you do but put your hands up, essentially? My last question for you, I kind of want to speak about 3 players Arsenal have been linked with. What do you make of Ivan Toney and Osimhen, and which one would you lead to? And also Pedro Neto.
Yeah, I think I'll start with Neto because I think it's been one of those discussions that have really just been off the back of sort of the injuries and not having, like I said, that player who's able to be that wide free man and be that sort of instant killer on the transition thing. A player like that wouldn't be my priority. And I think a lot of that in terms of getting a rotation from Martinelli is not about paying a big fee. It's about you can afford to have a more developmental role. Pedro Neto wouldn't be a priority at all for me. I don't think we need Ivan Toney at all. Interestingly, I'm not interested in that signing anymore. I think, and this may be where my own thoughts are skewed, but I just think we have a 6'4" German as well, and if you Havertz's aerial duel. So I don't want to get too caught up in numbers because that's not really what I am anyway. But Havertz's aerial duel numbers have been the best out of centre forwards in the Premier League over his time in the league. His win rate is exceptional. He's one of the best aerial duel winners around in terms of centre forwards. And I think a Toney signing. I don't know how much money Brentford would demand.
Anything from 50, 60 all the way to 80. If you talk about 80, then I'm not really on it. But 50, 60, I would.
I'm not a big backer of, I'm not in support of the Toney signing really. And who's the other? Osimhen?
Osimhen.
A lot of it just depends how Arteta sees the centre forward position long term at Arsenal. I think my absolute priorities would be ensuring that we probably look to move on Thomas Partey and replace him with a similar quality midfield.
But with a lot more years in the legs.
Yeah, and someone who's going to be much more consistent availability. That would be one of my top priorities because, like I said, we have, I think the chance creation will click. And the goals will click in times. We scored 91 last year, and that was more than the Invincible season. It was our most in a Premier League season, I think. So it is in there. But there's a few reasons, as we've already touched on, that maybe it hasn't quite been as electric as it has been. So in terms of strikers, Osimhen definitely over Ivan Toney because he gives you a two-way threat as well. But Toney, I was interested in him as a signing before we signed Kai Havertz. But now I still see his long-term position, of course, in that centre forward or that Ramsdale. As you said earlier, we're struggling to see Havertz, whether he's an out-and-out forward or an out-and-out midfielder, because by definition, I guess, that is the Ramsdale. They love to score, but they're not sort of your talisman. They also love to create, but they're not going to dictate attacks because they don't have that many. They don't have that many touches of the ball. They're more fun. They pride themselves on being in the right place at the right time. So a lot of it, I think, is on Kai Havertz's development. But out of those targets, Osimhen would be my favourite.
I mean, I would have them all really and truly. I'm a big fan of. I don't think Ivan Toney raises the curtain, but if you get players that make sure we don't fall beyond a certain flooring, then naturally in the squad, I'm a big fan of. I think there's a lot of similarities in his game to Gabriel Jesus. I think the only concern I would say, when you consider that, I think he's only scored 3 non-penalty goals more than Jesus. Fair enough, if he did sign for Arsenal, he'd be on the front foot. I like his mentality. I like his swagger. I like him as a player. And if Arsenal do want him, then that's enough for me. If Arteta wants him, I would lean towards Osimhen, because if you do have to spend 80 million on Ivan Toney, not that I'm a financial analyst, but you might as well find 20, 30 million, get 100 odd, and then start conversations with Napoli. He's contracted until 2025. I'm extremely biased with Pedro Neto. I'm taking him. I've been following him from his days at Braga. I think he's a good option to fight with Xhaka. I think this season he's shown he's good off the left. He's 23. And ultimately, just another player to give more gears to our game. It all depends on the price. I can't see us signing any of these players out of all 3 of them in January, because January is a difficult window. Probably Ivan Toney, considering he's got 18 months on his deal, but Brentford are going to play hardball over that. So we'd have to see. But I do agree with you in that for me, the priority, it should have been in the summer. And I guess Arteta deems it was because he signed Havertz and Rice for over touching almost 200 million, would be the midfield. I do think we need another number 6. I wouldn't be against another 8 to go with Rice and maybe even Partey for another year. I do like Jorginho and El Nene generally, but you know, their game time needs to be limited. And as we've all seen, it's all according to the game demands of the game. They're not really players I genuinely rely on. Like, regardless of the context of a game, Partey and Rice are 2 genuine options for me. Obviously, Odegaard can do that. So I kind of want a couple of more pure 6 and 8 positions or men that are going to likely be in the pivot. And then I'm all for the Havertz, the Vieiras, the Smith Rowes. I'm probably missing someone else in that, them kind of rotating 8. So I'm all for Arteta doing that. But I think sometimes football just demands us to have players in traditional roles. And, you know, again, football's ultimately decided in the defensive and attacking third, but it's the midfield battle. And I do think we're shown elements of getting that right, but I still don't think we're there, man. But yeah, man, Harvey, it's been amazing. We spoke about Arsenal, everything Arsenal. We spoke about City. We spoke about players. Once again, let people know where they can find you. Once again, make sure you're subscribing, people. All you need to do is click his name in the title when this is out and you can subscribe, or in the description. Yeah, let people know your content and where they can find you, my guy, before I let you get out of here.
Yeah, I mean, my YouTube channel is literally, it's just Harvey Gration. That's the name. I'm trying to upload as much as possible. And like I said, I've loved talking with you today because you've
many more to come, my guy, man. Appreciate you for being here.
You're a content creator that I've watched since I've started sort of the Arsenal.
Oh, you're gonna make me blush, man. Appreciate that.
You've watched the whole time. So I just really love being able to have a conversation with you, and hopefully, if we do this again, we can have a real nice chat about hopefully a very good Manchester City performance. But if not, have a really good chat about how the game unfolded. So I've loved it, and thank you so much for having me on.
No, minor, man. Fingers, toes, everything crossed that we can be, you know, joyous over the City result. But if not, you know, we'll still speak about it. We'll either have a somewhat crying session, or we'll be happy about winning and probably speak about our league trophies. But yeah, people, league title chances, better yet. But yeah, people, the man himself, Harvey, has told you where to find him. Don't get away without hitting the like button, subscribing to both our platforms. It's fantastic. We'll definitely have him again. Take care of yourself, my guy. People, we're out, man. Bless, man. Safe.
There's always that accurate defending. I think it's like